Great. Okay, so welcome to Faith and Calm, number 123. Tonight we have a doozy of a title. You everybody know what the title was for tonight? Yeah, the Holiness of Sinning. Sounds a good topic, you know. God really likes it. You could get thrown out of a lot of temples this way, you know, for giving this kind of a talk. But there's something very, very, very interesting, I think, here, and we'll pull that apart. As you know, I'm not going to jump too far ahead of time, but you know, on Yom Kippur, we do a lot of confessing, right, of our sins, you know, and so forth. But I've mentioned it before in other classes. It's very odd. We always mention this in the plural, right? Hashamnu, bagatnu, gazalnu, dibarnu, dofi. We stole, we cheated, we. It's two things there. One is, if you're going to confess, you have to make it personal. I mean, somebody says, you know, does something wrong to his spouse, and he goes to her and says, "Well, we were not really at the civilian sick that day. We were out bowling." You know, so we. Who's the we? No, you. Confess. It's you. The other thing is, it's always done with a song. Yeah, 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 Shabnu Bagatu Gizalnu Dofi. Now, if you translated that into English, it would be very amusing. You really should do that at the synagogues. You know, it's, I stole from you, I cheated you, I backstabbed you. You know, I mean, this is not Les Miserables. You know, if you're going to confess, but most synagogues that you go to, it's done to a very fancy tune. So there's something about this confession, something about sinning that somehow is a positive thing. That's what we're trying to get to tonight. And the third item that sort of is the background here is that you know that many people have a custom on Rosh Hashanah, the first day of Rosh Hashanah, to do something called Tashlich. We'll do it this year. We'll do it this year, the first day. In the afternoon, right? You go to a body of water. You don't take bread and carry, but go to a body of water and you symbolically cast your sins into the water, and you say a certain prayer. And That's a very common custom, and even the most, you know, it's taken off, and you can find many Reform and Reconstructionists and other synagogues, whatever Haburas, leave anybody out, who do this, who picked up on this custom. It's a custom. It's a minhag. Now, if you were in temple times, you would know that there's a second time that you go back to the water. It would be on Sukkot. There's a holiday thing that we do the first day of Sukkot called Simchas Pesach Shoeva. And in temple times, what it meant was that they used to go to a place called the Shiloah Springs. You can still go to it today. If you go to the City of David tour, you go to the bottom of the hill there, and you will go to the springs, and they would collect water. They would take this water, and they would pour it on the altar. And the Medrash says that this is the water that, you know, where you threw your sins in on Rosh Hashanah, and we collect them on Sukkot. So we're throwing their sins away. Why are we bringing them back onto the altar? Okay. So those three questions, we're going to try and then pull apart this idea of what is holy about sinning. So there's the Medrash, and the Medrash needs a little it's fairly straightforward, but it's going to need some understanding here. The Medrash says that they went to the divine attribute of wisdom, and they asked, what should be done with a person who sins? What's his punishment? So Chachma, wisdom, said that wickedness, Ra, pursues people who sin. In other words, what goes around comes around. And if you start doing Averas, you'll do even more Averas, and it will just pursue you, and you'll fall deeper and deeper into debt. That's what they asked Chachma. So the Jews were not happy with that answer. As usual with Jews, we don't like the first opinion. You go to get a second opinion. So they went to prophecy, and they got a statement from prophecy. Actually, the first one was a quote from Mishlei, which is Chachma, which is Shlomo Melech. The second one is a quote from Ezekiel Yeheskel, the prophet Yeheskel. They said, what should happen to a person who sins? And he says, sinners should die. That's what Prophet Yehezkel says, that the reward for sinning is death. Okay, not happy with one, not happy with two, go for a third opinion. So they went to the Torah. They said, Torah, what should be done with a person who sins? So the Torah says, oh, let him bring a carbon. Let him bring an offering. Okay. Didn't like that answer. So they said, we'll go straight to God. God, what should happen if a person sins? And he says, let him do tshuva. In this little dialogue, in this little cute the story, is a lot of stuff that we need to unpack. What are we saying here? We're saying the following. I like that, though.
It was an arrow in your face.
There was an arrow on my face. Oh, okay. Hi.
Sorry, I'm late. I have a note.
It's okay. We're already started. We're already in the middle. So that's not, yeah, let's just keep that quiet here. Okay. So what is the meaning of this story? So the first one, they went to Chachma. They asked what should happen with a sinner. So basically, Chachma is the psychological approach. What's the punishment of sin? And when a person starts sinning, what happens is it's cause and effect. The more you do of good things, the more you feel empowered and you feel energized to do more good things. And when you start doing negative things, you will continue to do more negative things. It's the way of the world. It's how the system is set up. It's how the universe operates. Do positive, and more positive things will happen. That basically was a Chachma, and that's what Chachma's approach and understanding the situation is about. They tell a story of a guy a thief, who stole a gold watch from a rabbi. And he felt bad about it, so he came to the rabbi, and he asked the rabbi, he said, Rabbi, if a person happened to steal something from someone else, what should he do? Rabbi says he has to return it back to the person who he stole it from. So the guy says, really, Rabbi? He says, and what happens if the guy doesn't want it back? The rabbi says, in such a case, then you can keep it. So the thief says to the rabbi, Rabbi, do you want this watch? He says, the rabbi gets upset with him. He says, I told you, if you stole something, you have to give it back to the person who you stole it from. I don't want it. So the guy says, okay, good. Keeping it. The guy doesn't want it. So this is the issue with that Chacham is bringing out. It's not thievery, bad things. It's not that you're going to get caught and the police are going to find you or somebody's going to expose you or something like that. There is an automatic effect. When you do things that are bad, you will do more bad things. This thief, he didn't understand that. He may have technically figured out a way of getting off the hook, but that doesn't really get him off the on a moral scale, because he did steal, and therefore, just because he found a trickier way to be able to validate his thievery, it wasn't helping him. So that's what Chachma is saying. Chachma is saying, listen, there are rules. This is how things go, and you got to be honest with yourself. And the honesty this is one of the first stages of the confession and of approaching that. But we're going to get to the fourth level of the teshuva. We just have to go through the other stages first. So that was the first stage. Actually, there's another interesting story. It's all about the fourth Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rebbe Marash. One time, a young man came into him, and he said, I have a friend, and he did something terrible, and he feels really bad about it. And he sent me to ask you how he should be able to do tshuva. So the Rebbe Rashab said, the Rebbe Marash said to him back, he said, I'll gladly, I like to help, but I have just this one question. He says, I don't know why your friend sent you to ask this question. Why didn't he come himself and tell me that he has a friend who actually did the Avera, and then, and that would have solved the problem. So the guy realized, you're coming to a Rebbe. You have to be honest. This is the Rebbe, actually, the truth is I did the Avera. You can't hide from the Rebbe. So that's all right. I maybe I didn't tell the joke well enough. Nobody laughed, but I thought it was funny. That's what they asked Chachma. Then they went to prophecy. They said, prophecy, what should happen with the person sins? The answer the prophecy gives is that you should die, because prophecy, basically, the whole idea of a prophecy is that you're a conduit and you're transparent to something that's higher than you. And it's just like when you blow, if there's an obstacle between the where the air comes from to where it goes to, you can't get through. Godliness and holiness is the source of life. And therefore, if you would do an Avera, you are cutting yourself off. So prophecy has, from its perspective, says basically sinning is like cutting yourself off from your source. Okay. So then they went to the Torah and they said the Torah has a deeper understanding of what's going on. The Torah says, yes, but that's only the external part. Only the external part of the person actually gets involved in the Avera. It's his Neshek Behemoth, it's his animal soul. But true down deep inside, nobody really wants to cut himself off from God. Therefore, you bring a carbon, which means that you offer your animal soul, you offer some blood, you sacrifice a little bit. You don't do things just for their comfort reasons. You pray earlier, you bring an offering, you do what you do, you know, this prayer is in place of offering, and that will bring you your atonement. Okay? Then they went to God and they said, you just do tshuva. What does God say? Why is tshuva? What is the power? Because God is basically saying, you know, yeah, Chachma, that's my Chachma. That's how Chachma views it. In prophecy, that's how prophecy views it. In Torah, it's my Torah. But God himself is not limited to a certain form, meaning God is not limited to spirituality. God is above that. So spirituality as wisdom can only say one thing. Prophecy can only say one thing. Torah can only say one thing. But God is not limited in any way. In a certain way, God is beyond all of this. So God can say, I can give you a deeper perspective of who you are and what doing an Avera is all about. And what God is saying is, do tshuva. What is he telling us? So here's what tshuva is all about. This is the season of tshuva. This is the season of cleaning yourself up and getting yourself in order. So what is tshuva all about? Tshuva is not just cleaning the slate and going back to this original situation. Tshuva is about transforming oneself so that what you did before, it says that when tshuva out of fear of punishment, only cleans the slate. But tshuva out of love actually turns over the Avera into a positive mitzvah. How we turn an Avera into a mitzvah? How can we say that, a sin has actually become something holy? How can you actually overturn it? And that's what power of tshuva is. So we're going to learn tonight what that power of tshuva is really about. Yes, it actually can. And I'll do this in a couple stages. First off, I'll tell you that, we've seen that, we know this from life. We know this, that sometimes Eli Wiesel once said, that nobody really appreciates as much just the day-to-day life of being free and not being under oppression or in the Holocaust as the Holocaust survivors. Because when you have been in prison, when you have been in trouble, when you have been sick, when you have been anything that has gone wrong in your life, and all of a sudden you get a second lease on it, you really appreciate the life much more deeper. So with this transformation that comes from the idea of being far away and getting closer, actually makes you more appreciative of the gifts and the pleasures that you're given. That is true. Now, there's the story, I've told it before also, that gives a deeper understanding on this, also the same idea. There was a very famous chief executive officer of IBM. His name was Henry Watson. And Watson, one day, one of his chief officers came into his office and said, I'm resigning. And Watson says, why? And he says, because yesterday I lost $10 million from this company. I made a stupid mistake. I didn't intend to. And here's my resignation, because it was probably back in the 40s or 30s. And it's unforgivable. And there's no other really course than to resign. And Watson turned to him and said, you're not resigning. And he says, why not? And he says, because I just invested $10 million in your education. and you're not leaving after I just put that much money into your education. And the guy became extremely loyal. loyalty is not easy to get. But this guy was extremely loyal. You can't buy loyalty. And this guy became really loyal because this is what it is. You invest in the person. And that is what God is saying is, what? When you do an Avera, and then you become educated through that Avera, it's no longer an Avera. It's part of the process of being educated. And education comes with a lot of slip-ups and a lot of faults and a lot of messing up. You can't get smart. People don't grow and people don't become better if they don't face some struggles and some difficulties in life. And that's really it actually becomes part of the picture. As I've said before, the famous story with Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great once came to Israel, and it's worth repeating the story because it's such a good story. And he told the sculptor, he said, listen, I want you to make a statue of myself, but it has to be flattering and it can't show anything bad to me, but it has to be accurate and true. And there was a big problem because Alexander the Great had a big birthmark above his eyes, like Gorbachev. And, and if he did it accurate, you would see this big mark on him. So the guy was thinking, what am I going to do? And then finally he realized, I'm going to paint him. We're going to make the statue of him like a thinker. So I go, you have him like going like this, and there he is. He's a thinker. And Alexander the Great loved it, absolutely loved it, because he took the blemish and made it part of the positive, showing that Alexander the Great was a thinker. And of course, being a Greek and interested in science and philosophy and all this other kind of stuff, it really was very flattering to Alexander to picture him as a thinker. But he was able to hide the blemish. So the blemish became part of what actually turned that into a special painting, statue, or whatever it was. Maybe it was a painting, and then Rodin got the idea from it. All right. So anyway, that is what sins do. Sins actually are actually part of what is the process of actually becoming a better person and doing a mitzvah. That is why in the Gemara it says, it asks an interesting question. It's a very bizarre question. It says that every mitzvah, before you can actually do it, you have to do something called a hechsher, preparation for the mitzvah. For example, you're going to light Shabbos candles. You got to go out and buy Shabbos candles. You're going to build a sukkah. You have to go buy wood. You have to put it together. And then you can sit in the sukkah. The fill-in, you have to somebody has to process the leather. He has to make it into the black boxes. There's everything that we do as a mitzvah has something that you have to do before in order to be the mitzvah. The thing itself before is not part of the mitzvah, but without it, you couldn't do the mitzvah. So the rabbi says an interesting question. What is the preparation, the hechsher, that you have to do in order for doing the mitzvah of tshuva? So some class said, confessing. No. Confessing is part of the tshuva. The thing that you have to do before you can do tshuva is you have to do the Avera. The Avera is actually the part of the process of actually getting to this level of doing tshuva. Now, how does that work? You mean I have to sin in order to do tshuva? But I'm not. But that means God wants me to do a Avera so I can get to do tshuva because He wants me to do that mitzvah called tshuva. So I have to do the Avera. And so the Arizal explains that there are actually parallel universes. And this is how it actually free will and everything else works. It's a deep question. It's a deep philosophical idea. What he basically says is that when you first do the Avera, you're not aligned with God's universe. God wants you eventually to do the mitzvah. When you do tshuva, the two universes unite together, and then your Avera beforehand becomes part of what you did tshuva for, so it actually becomes now part retroactively. It's where quantum mechanics comes in, and it becomes actually part of actually doing the mitzvah tshuva. If you don't do tshuva, then your two worlds stay divergent. When you do tshuva, that actually becomes part and parcel of the actual mitzvah. And that is how it works. That tshuva actually rewrites history. It actually goes back and it actually says, okay, that Avera you were doing, you were just learning. You were learning how to become a better person. You were learning how to serve God better. You were learning how to become a more powerful person. People who actually fall down and do a lot and get into trouble, they actually have a tremendous potential to be able to, when they do tshuva and they do learn from it and they do bring that lesson to other people, then they actually they turn around that negative experience into a positive experience. And that is what God is saying with tshuva. That is the secret of tshuva. You can't get it directly right away. Chachma says, okay, sin is bad, and there's nothing about it, and it'll cause more. Prophecy can only is limited within the spiritual, but God is not limited to time and space. And He says, I'm giving you this opportunity, this mitzvah of tshuva, this month of tshuva, this month of being able to turn around and to take a look back on the things that where you failed before, and they aren't necessarily you have to view them not as, oh, I'm bad, I'm a failure, or I fell down again and again and again, and therefore I'm not capable of doing it. What we're actually saying is those are part of your education process. It's part of my education process. And every time that I do something and I make a mistake, I have the opportunity, if I will take advantage of it, to apologize to the person who I did something to, and that I can take note of how I slipped in that time, and how I can actually then turn that event around, and then it no longer stays no longer as the blemish on the forehead, but now it actually gets transformed and becomes part of the mitzvah.
Can I ask a small question?
Yeah.
Maybe it's not even relevant to what you're even saying, but even if you don't think of it as like you're doing a big Avera, there's like all these little things that just turn into them. You know what I mean? Like, so no, I don't mean it in a negative way that anyone should think, we're such bad people, but like whatever, like nuances of like, like you accidentally steal money because you mispaid a certain amount of thing, or you embarrass somebody, you didn't even really know it, like all these things. So, I don't know. It's like, should I just not
That's why we can sing
ask the
on
question?
Yom Kippur. That's why we're singing. Ashamnu, Bagadnu, Gazalnu. And that's what you say. Salach lanu, Kaper lanu. Together, we're celebrating. Why are we celebrating? Because we're able to, what I said at the beginning of the class, we're taking the negative and we're turning it into a positive. We're taking the sins we threw away on Rosh Hashanah in Tashlich, and now we're harvesting the stuff on Sukkot. We can take, this is the power of tshuva. It rewrites history, it rewrites the past, and it takes what was negative, whatever level it is, because it wasn't fitting for me who I truly am. Yes, I'm not a perfect person, but you know what? I was able to actually, if I was paying attention and I was on top of my ball game, I wouldn't have done that sort of thing. In that way, I take responsibility for it. When we take responsibility for those things and we say, you know what? I am actually a bigger person than I am, because that's who I truly am inside. I'm somebody holy. I'm somebody who's capable of giving light and improve and helping other people. And I slipped. I did things wrong in the past year. I did a lot of things wrong. I did a lot of things. And you know what? It's not like pushing me down. I have an opportunity here. The more that when I focus on those things, I don't look at them and think bad, 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 bad. That's not the idea. Guilt, 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 guilt. The idea is these are things that I can use as an opportunity to actually serve Hashem better, because the more I'm aware of them, the more I can actually utilize the feeling of the feeling that, you know what, this wasn't really, I wasn't the best at doing my best game that day. And you know what? I can do my best game, and I can do my best game better, eat better and better. I can improve, and I can finally get my RBI up to a higher level and so forth. I can do that, and I can actually, and I'm on a growth path. And it's, the world is a spiral, and sometimes I will slip. And you know what? If I slip, this is actually just, as my wife used to say, what is it? Notice, and what do you do? You just notice it and then improve, or something like that. There was a I forgot the phrase, but there was something like that,
Observe and correct.
Observe and correct. There you go. She got it. Observe and correct. So, these are opportunities for observing and then correcting. And that is a transformational process of tshuva. And that's why we can sing. That's why we can sing all these songs on Yom Kippur, because we're cleaning up all the schmutz out of our lives. And when after you take that nice bubble bath of the soul, as my wife likes to explain it to the kindergartners, you feel clean, you feel holy, you feel good. You have to bring it down to kindergartners, you know?
No,
So
it's
it
good.
says,
It's
Cuba
good.
is a bubble bath for the soul. So, that's what it is. And, it's not bad to take a bubble bath once in a while. So I
You know
thought that
what?
this was a useful introduction. I'm not going to have the time to tell the story. I'll tell it next week. It's a humdinger of a story.
I have a story.
But Mishlam Judas has the story. And I checked up on the story. I got it now corrected. So
Lovely stories tonight.
okay.
Shimon, this was really excellent. I do have a question. What if some people figure out that they did something wrong, but they never really do teshuva? They just start doing whatever, they just stop doing whatever they did wrong.
And then, it's okay. But then, I think you're relying on, maybe God helped you or somebody else helped you or something else. So, you have an opportunity. It's good to stop doing bad things, even if the government forces you by throwing you in the jail and you can't do that bad thing anymore. Then you know what? You do get some credit for not doing it anymore. That's true. But that is called either tshuva tata, the lower level of tshuva, not tshuva out of love. When you do tshuva out of love, then your sins are turned into a positive thing. So to turn the negative, to just stop doing it, that's the lower level of tshuva. And then the Chassidus explains, but the higher level of tshuva is, I'm doing this out of love. Doing it out of love means that I realized that this was all a part of a process of learning. And this is all a process of being able to get closer to God. And I'm not doing it because I just want to not get punished, and not just because I don't want to be burnt and flooded and strangled and, all the other things it says in Sutsana Tokev, and so forth. I'm not just doing it out of fear. You got to get rid of this fear-driven Judaism, because when you do it out of fear, it's okay. It's better than not doing the Aveira anymore, but it's nowhere comparable to what it means to actually turn around that negative stuff and actually make it part of a mitzvah and part of something that you're using to get closer to God, and that he liked it. And you know what? And then it becomes the actual person who, there's an interesting statement from the Kotzker Rebbe. The Kotzker Rebbe says one of the reasons why we say all the confessions in the plural is because God is saying it together with us. Meaning, he's saying together with us, I sinned, I lied, I stole, and so forth. Why is he saying it together with us? Because he was the one that he's the one who created us this way. And therefore, he also has responsibility in these Averas. And when we take the Averas and we actually start using them the way he wanted them to be done, not to remain as something that makes a barrier between him and us, but rather something that helps bring out love, which is a connection to God, then we are doing tshuva out of love, and then we're actually showing that the deeper reason for these things is something we can sing about, something that we can get closer to God. And that actually is part of our mission in this world, is to come down into this world and deal with the schmutzy, dirty things and make the world a much cleaner and more healthier and more organized and more Masudadik place. And with that, we have finished cleaning up and got everything in order, and we can bring it on to Shalom Meshuvah, because that's part of our mission in the world. Right?
Could I
Is
ask
that
one
what
more
you were
quick thing?
asking?
In the story that you told about the man who did something at work and then he was going to resign, was the act of wanting to resign teshuva? Or like, for instance, it doesn't sound like he had to do teshuva unless the act of wanting to resign was teshuva.
Oh, he had regret. Regret is part of the mitzvah of tshuva. There is a certain sense where you don't actually, you don't just say it's always good and lovey-dovey and, and everything was wonderful and so forth. There is an aspect of regret, but what I'm trying to indicate here is more of the more thing is, it's the response after the regret. What are you doing with that? Are you just going to sit there and then mope and be depressed and regret and say how terrible you are? Or are you actually taking this and actually using it, which is what this guy did? He became one of the most devoted employees of the company and paid back probably everything he did in one way or the other. Maybe not, if not financially, at least, he had a ripple effect, as people do inside a company, and other people saw that level and also became devoted and involved and so forth. So you never know what kind of effect you're having. It doesn't have to be only personal effect. So when we clean up our act, we have an effect on those around us, and then that is like a nuclear reaction. As the Rebbe was once asked, he said, human relationships are not like chemical processes. With chemicals, you have to add in this much of this and this much of this, and you get as much as the two things together. 1 and 1 equals 2. With a nuclear reaction, what happens is one atom, hits 2 atoms, hits 4 atoms, hits 8 atoms, and it explodes, is a nuclear explosion. Human social relationships are more like a nuclear reaction than a chemical reaction. And therefore, everything that positive that we do has a ripple effect on this universe. And you affect 3 people, 4 people, you bring in 2 or more people to the class, whatever it is, you give these ideas over others, and it affects others and others and others. And it also a ripple effect in changing this universe. And that is what the Rebbe taught about human relationships. It's an atomic relation, not a chemical reaction.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm sorry I interrupted. Sorry.
No, I
I'm not
was
interrupted. I'll just have to save it for next week. It's like a great story. So
no, it wasn't a question to you. Molly, I was asking you if that was really what you asked. I thought you were just asking, why do people just not do tshuva? They stop doing the thing. And I thought you were just asking, like, why don't people do tshuva also? Right?
No,
It's
I
not-
was saying that some
Sorry, it's in the middle of a
people
question. Yeah,
may-
yeah.
Okay.
Sorry,
That's
say
what
your
you were
question again.
You're asking, right? No, I'm asking Molly. And I think
Oh,
what
oh.
Molly asked, I don't know if Yechezkel Shimon understood.
No,
exactly
what
you were
I was
asking.
saying, what I was saying, sorry, is that it doesn't, I don't know if all people do teshuva, if they do an avera, they might stop doing the avera and they might realize I shouldn't do that anymore. I'm not going to do it anymore. But if they decide that if they don't think to do teshuva, is it still to their credit? Does it still have
Oh,
the
is it
same
still for
merit?
that credit?
Yeah,
Yeah, 'cause
that's what
it's
I'm
not
asking. is Does
easy.
it have the same merit for them because they stopped even if they didn't do teshuva? That's what
Oh,
I
and
was.
so he explained the different levels, right? There's the different levels he explained. Oh, okay, no, I just thought you thought, like, why do people not remember? And the truth is, a lot of, I can just tell you, you don't always remember, okay, I have to do tshuva, and I have to sit there, okay, I regret this. I don't know if he said the 3 steps, but yeah, sometimes you're just like happy that you being careful not to do it.
Yeah, and not everybody thinks on a deeper level that way either, Some people feel greater regret than others, and others are more logical and might think, oh, this isn't the right thing to do. Well, I won't do it anymore.
Right.
But I don't need to do teshuva, but not think about doing teshuva. Anyway, sorry. Okay, hi,
Okay.
Shalom, miss.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Okay, good. So good to see everybody. Does anybody have anything else that they'd like to say before I begin?
When are you starting school?
I already did. Already
Oh,
teaching.
and
Yeah.
you're smiling. Good.
Yeah, Baruch Hashem. I love it. I can't imagine not doing it. And they'll have to think of a way to get me to school and back when I'm 100, but I still love it. So anyway, so this week, this past week, the parsha was Shoftim, and in Parsha Shoftim in 1990. Let me start with the things I say, the 4 things I say. Number 1, we're in an extraordinary time, and how do I know it? Because the Rebbe told us that this is the time. That the Rebbe told us that this is the time that the redemption of the Jewish people in the world is starting to unfold. And tonight we're gonna find out why is it? Why should we believe him? Why should we believe him? That's what we're going to discuss tonight. And second thing is that that you and I were handpicked. Our souls were handpicked to be in this time in history, this amazing time. Number 3, we were given all the tools that we need, the Torah, which is our guidebook, and the mitzvahs, which are our power tools. And number 4, what we're doing tonight actively advances the cause of the redemption. The Rebbe told us that there's no faster way to speed the redemption than by learning about it. That's the fuel that pushes it along. And once you start learning about it, I have to say it's an addicting thing. I take a class every day in the I participate in a class every day, studying the Rebbe's talks from 1991, 1992, and it's just it's an amazing thing. I love it. Okay, so so now in this talk in Shoftim, the Rebbe gave it's called a block. People said afterwards it was a blockbuster, and the Rebbe essentially said, I'll skip right to the mustard. The Rebbe said that prophecy has returned to the Jewish people. Now it says in our Torah sources that prophecy returns before Mashiach comes. Prophecy, and it is sort of like the groundwork. It is like the red carpet that's rolled out, and then the redemption will unfold. And it comes even before the redemption, the return of prophecy to the Jewish people. For those who don't know, we've had many prophets in Jewish history. It's one of the 13 principles of Jewish belief that God communicates with extremely holy people, men and women. There were women prophets and men prophets, and and a lot of our Torah liturgy are books of the prophets. For example, you've heard of I think in English it's called Isaiah, in Hebrew it's Yeshayahu, and Jeremiah, which is Yirmiyahu, and there's a whole bunch of prophets, and but the era of prophecy, the general era of prophecy, ended with the first temple. When the first temple was destroyed, the general era of prophecy was ended, and another time perhaps we can speak about why and what, and the Rebbe explains.
Has it come back now?
The Rebbe said it's come. Yes, the Rebbe said yes. That's what we're going to talk about. So, okay. So the Rebbe said that when the Rebbe, okay, the Rebbe said that prophecy has returned to the Jewish people, and that and he reminded the Jewish people that when a prophet says something, it's not just a nice thing. When a prophet says something, first of all, if it's a good prophecy, it must come true. Once it exits a prophecy is simply something that God told the prophet. A prophet has worked himself up to such a level of tzidkis, such a level of righteousness that he earns hearing God. And the rest of us talk to God, and we try and follow what God wants, but we don't actually hear God. They actually hear God, and so when God tells a prophet something, the prophet is obligated. He must give over that prophecy. It's not maybe I don't want to say it. No, it's an absolute must. He must give over the prophecy. And when a prophet says something, the Jewish people, it's not a nice thing to believe the prophet. They are obligated to believe the prophet. And the Jewish people must do and must listen to what the prophet said. And the Rebbe, I have to say, for decades before this talk in 1991, the Rebbe already had said so many things that established him as a Torah level prophet. He said in order to be a prophet, a Torah level prophet, you have to be extraordinarily good. You have to be a tzaddik. You have to be a totally righteous person. And you have to know the Torah backwards and forwards. And you have to say at least two things that came true. And the Rebbe, it's like, the miracles are, since before he became Rebbe in 1950, the miracles were rolling on the floor. There were so many miracles, so many things that he said would come true and came true. So I'm going to give you just two examples. And, we have a diverse group that listens to this, listens to these sessions. And I'm telling you that if you are 60 or older, you'll know what I'm talking about. If you're younger than 60, you did not live during this time. However, you probably heard about it because they're extremely famous episodes in Jewish history. And so in 1967, as we all know, and if you want to find out the story, don't read Wikipedia. I just went to Wikipedia today to look up the 6-Day War. And it's comical. You could read which paragraphs are written by anti-Semites and which paragraphs are written by Jews, by Jews who are not anti-Semites. And you should know that Wikipedia is a totally, they war back and forth between each other. Which version is going to go in, right? And I want you to know the same thing is true with there's no partial media at all anymore. What is that thing that what is it called? Snopes? Yeah, something like that.
Yes.
Where you're supposed to find out if something is true or not. It's totally politically leaning one way. It's hysterical to think that, fact finding, Wikipedia is fact finding. No, there's no such thing anymore. There is no such thing. It's all in the hands of one side or the other, and you can tell by reading it. It's a shame. It's a shame. We don't really have journalism anymore. So anyway, in 1967, anybody who lived through it, anybody who heard about it from their parents, know that there were 7 Arab nations that got together because they were bitter about 1948 that anything was given to the Jewish people, and they decided, this is it. We're getting together, and we are going to get rid of the Jewish state. We're going to drive it into the ocean once and for all. And these were not small nations: Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Lebanon. All of them got together. And it was known that they were poised to attack Israel. And in Israel, the climate was total. It was in June of 1967, and Israel was in total turmoil, total panic. The president of Israel, I don't remember his name, the president of Israel, as things were heating up, the president of Israel got on the radio to calm the nation. And he was so scared that he simply burst into tears, and he made everybody else like totally much worse. Oh my God, the president is like, he's crying hysterically. He's so scared. Meanwhile, the Lubavitcher Rebbe in New York was saying things that were being published. Lubavitcher Rebbe was saying, there is nothing to worry about. Nobody who is in Israel needs to leave. There's every year there are thousands of American kids who go to Israel to to study in yeshivas there. There's a popular thing called the gap year. Some people go for 1 year, some right after high school before beginning college, if they're going to college, and other people go for many years. But there's always thousands of American Jewish kids in Israel. And parents were totally panic-stricken, the American parents, and they wanted to pull their children out. And the Rebbe said, no one should leave. Israel is the safest place, and everything is going to be fine. And at Lag BaOmer, which is a holiday around May, which was about 2 weeks before the attack, the Rebbe announced, God is sending the Jewish people in Israel his blessings and his salvation, and they will come out of this with great success. And he told the kids, the Lag BaOmer parades are for kids, Jewish kids. And he said, you can make the miracles even bigger by doing mitzvahs. And anyway, the source of my what I'm saying now, one of my favorite rabbis is Rabbi Reuven Wolf. I think it's Wolfe. I love his stuff. Anyway, I know this stuff, but he refreshed my memory. In Israel, anyway, they were just panic stricken. They were preparing thousands upon thousands and thousands of body bags to, because they're expecting massive annihilation. And but the secular newspapers in Israel were also picking up with what the Rebbe said. Newspapers that were totally anti-religious were carrying big headlines. Lubavitcher Rebbe says it's going to be okay. And people were clinging to what the Rebbe said. Religious, non-religious, everybody was so afraid. And anyway, I'm going to tell you a story inside a story. The U.S. ambassador to the UN at the time, his name was Arthur and he had an aide, and the aide's name was Joe. And I don't know, I forgive me, I don't know the last name of this guy, but Joe had cousins who called him, and the cousins asked him, please come, we need to talk to you. And he came to visit them, and they said, we have an only child, we don't have any other kids, we have one kid, and he's in Israel. And he became a Baal Tshuva. He became one of these people who keeps, he started out as a secular Jewish kid, and he became Torah observant, and now he's in yeshiva there. And we sent him a ticket telling him he has to come home, and he won't come home because he says he's a Lubavitcher, and he says the Lubavitcher Rebbe says it's the safest place that anybody can be, and that a Jew can be, and I'm not going home. I'm listening to the Rebbe. And they said, we wrote, and the family wrote to the Rebbe saying, we need our son to come home. You need to tell him that he can come home. And the Rebbe said, guardian of Israel does not slumber or sleep. Everything is going to be fine. And this did not satisfy the parents. And the parents said, Joe, you need to help us. You need to use your connections. We need to speak to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. We need to get to him. We need to have him turn around his advice. And meanwhile, they say, Joe, you work for, you work for the U.S. ambassador to the UN. You have close ties to the State Department. You tell us, what do you think? And what do you think? Is Israel really in danger? And Joe didn't want to tell them the extent, but he wanted to be honest. And he said, based on our information, it is so dangerous. My boss, Arthur Goldberg, he is not sleeping at all at night. He is so terrified of what's going to happen to Israel. It's a joke. It's a joke. The massive amount of forces that they have, that the enemy has amassed, and Israel is so tiny. It's a joke. They're going to decimate Israel. Anyway, and Joe said, don't worry, I'm going to use my connections, and I'm going to speak to the Rebbe. Don't worry, I'm going to get in there. So he called the Rebbe's office, and he expected, because he works for the State Department, he expected to get in right away. The Rebbe's office said, well, if it's an emergency, you're from the State Department, we can get you in tomorrow at 2 a.m. And he said, okay, I'll take that. So he shows up at 2 a.m. and he tells the Rebbe, because the Rebbe met with people till 6 in the morning, and then he went home for a couple of hours, and then he came back. And that was the Rebbe's life. And so Joe tells the Rebbe, I apologize. I used my office in order to get an early appointment with you, but I have to tell you, I'm here for a private issue. I have cousins, they're very close to me, my first cousins, and they have a kid in Israel who's learning in yeshiva. And because you told them that there's nothing wrong with Israel, that Israel's going to be safe, he's there, and they are worried sick, and they need you to do something. They need you to change what you said. And the Rebbe says to him, I myself have thousands and thousands of one and only children in Israel. They're all my children. And if I'm telling you that it will be safe in Israel, it is because I know so with absolute certainty. Now, what human being says that? What human being says in the face of horrible danger that I know something with absolute certainty, unless they do? And so Joe is like knocked over by that statement, but he feels obligated, and he says, but Rebbe, you might not, I work for the State Department, you might not have the inside information that I have. Rebbe, I have to tell you that Israel is not a safe place. Israel is in grave danger. The Rebbe cut him off. And the Rebbe said, Israel is not in grave danger. Israel is poised for a magnificent victory. It is standing at the ready for the most amazing victory. And you can tell that father that that's what's going to happen. And if the father wants to make the victory even bigger, he can start to put on tefillin every day. So Joe says to him, Rebbe, the Jewish people are lucky to have a leader like you. And the Rebbe says, I want you to promise me something. After the war is over, there's going to be a war. After the war is over, I want you to come right away back to me. And Joe said, of course, I'll come right away back to you. 6 days later, Joe is sitting with his boss, Arthur Goldberg, and they are watching the liberation of the West on TV, the liberation of the Western Wall, soldiers weeping at the Western Wall, and Rabbi Shlomo Goren blowing the shofar at the Western Wall in that historic moment. And his boss is like completely turned upside down, inside out. And the boss said, "Who could ever have imagined such a thing? Who?" And Joe couldn't resist, and he said, "There was a man in New York, and he knew what was going to happen." And he told him he told Arthur Goldberg the whole story. So anyway, the war is over. Spectacular, unbelievable victory. Not only is it a military victory, but the Jews got back Jerusalem. They got back the Western Wall. They got back all these holy places. And they were able, Israel at one point, I think, was 8 miles wide. It was so dangerous. It had this little skinny belt in the middle. And now, okay, it's a little bit wider than eight miles wide, but not that much wider. Anyway, he comes back to the Rebbe, and he expects the Rebbe is going to tell him, "Told you so." No, the Rebbe doesn't say anything like that. As soon as he comes in, the Rebbe is incredibly serious, and the Rebbe says to him, "Now we are in immense danger. Right now, we are in immense danger, now that the war is over." And he said, the Jewish people have always survived. Their history is a history of times of miraculous salvation and times of concealment, godly concealment. But in general, the whole history of the Jewish people is a miraculous event. It's just it's miraculous that we're still here. But even though our whole history is miraculous, there have been extremely few times in history where God reveals his hand in such an open way. And he said, for example, the time when we got out of Egypt, that's when God showed his hand to the world. And last week, God showed his hand to the entire world. Nobody can deny that this was a godly event. A short segue. Rabbi Wolf says that he was talking to somebody who was a trainee at West Point years later, and in West Point they were teaching military strategy, and they taught different examples of when a nation was expected to lose a war, and instead they won the war, and how they did it, what their military strategy was. And somebody who was sitting in the audience asked the instructor, "I don't get it. Why aren't you talking about the 6-day war? Israel is supposed to be decimated, and it had such a spectacular victory." And the instructor said, "Because everybody knows that that was not military strategy. Everybody knows that that was the hand of God." It's short and simple. So anyway, the Rebbe said, the danger that is happening now is that a mild danger, that the military people will start saying that it was their brilliance that caused this victory. But the more serious and immediate danger is that out of guilt, the Jewish people are going to give back this land that was given to them as a gift by God. It's their land, and it was given back to them as a gift of God, and out of guilt, they might give parts of it back. And that is a terrible danger. They will compromise their security. So, and besides, you're not allowed to give back parts of Israel these are parts of Israel. So, anyway, the Rebbe said, "Why am I talking to you? Because I know that right now, a lot of high government officials from Israel are going to be coming to America, and they're going to be coming to the State Department. They're going to be talking to your office. And I want you to tell them that, that this land is a gift from God, and that they don't have the right to give it back. And if they ask you, what are you talking about? You're an aide to somebody in the State Department. You're telling us we're the top people in Israel. You're telling us that you know better than we do. I want you to tell them your story. I want you to tell them that you came to me before the war when things looked terrible. And you came on behalf of your cousins who had an only child in Israel, and they wanted him home. And you heard from this room here that there was absolutely nothing to fear, and there would be a miraculous victory. And so is essentially the Rebbe said, I want them to know that this is something that was I knew through, he didn't use the word prophecy, but this is something that I knew about it, and it came out exactly as I said. And it is an act of God, nothing more and nothing less. So anyway, we all know what happened. It's an interesting point, just as Jews to know. It's an interesting point if you think about it. It was an open miracle, the 6-day war. And even though God does open miracles, he still leaves free choice to the Jewish people about what they're going to do about it. And they gave back a lot of land, right? So God does not interfere in free choice. He does miracles, but then he lets us do what we're going to do. He lets us be foolish, and we're going to be foolish. So anyway, let's skip to the summer of 1973.
Could I ask you a question?
Yes, yeah.
Should
And by the way, Israel's PR soared after the 6-day war. Israel's everything soared after the 6-day war. Everybody was amazed. Go ahead, Molly.
was the Sinai meant to be part of Israel?
Good question. I don't know how. I don't know if the Sinai was meant to be. I don't know. It's a good question. I don't think so. I don't think the Sinai. I don't think the whole Sinai is part of biblical Israel. But
Because
anyway,
that was the first land to be given back.
It's true. But
it
they
was
also gave away the Temple Mount. It's ridiculous. They gave away the Temple Mount. How could they possibly do that? They gave away the Temple Mount. They gave away different things. But you're right. But I don't know if they're allowed. I don't know if they were allowed to give that back from a standpoint of military safety. So as you can see from 67, 73, 6 years later, right? 1973. Another prophecy. Israel is fine and dandy. We're in the summer, we're in the wake of the 6-day war. Israel was thriving like mad. And all of a sudden, that summer, the Rebbe starts calling for massive rallies of children. And the Rebbe said, make Jewish summer camps. We need an army of children in order to thwart the enemy. We need an army of children. They have to do mitzvahs. The children are the most powerful. They have to give charity, tzedakah. They have to say Torah. We need the children. If there's no Jewish camp in your city, make a Jewish camp and have them say the 12 Pesukim, which are 12 holy passages of the Torah that are special for children. And absolutely nobody understood what the Rebbe was talking about. Everything was hunky-dory in Israel. Nobody was suspecting anything. And the Rebbe would quote often. The Rebbe would say, there's a passage, I think it's number 8 of the 150 Tillim. It says, Mipi olalim v'yonkim yisarata ois. From the mouths of babes and sucklings comes strength. When a Jewish kid does a mitzvah, it's more powerful than anything an adult can do spiritually. So, but anyway, nobody knows what the Rebbe's talking about. And then 3 days before the Yom Kippur War, the Rebbe is the next day. The Rebbe on Sunday, the Rebbe has hundreds of children in 770 to give tzedakah. They made a huge rally in Yerushalayim for Jewish kids to recite the 12 passages and do other holy things. And then on Yom Kippur, to everybody's shock, it was a total surprise. Syria, Lebanon, and the Egyptian armies launched a massive surprise attack on Yom Kippur. And the Jews were totally caught off guard. If somebody had been listening to the Rebbe, they wouldn't have been caught off guard, but the Jews were totally caught off guard. And the Rebbe, and we know that they won that war too. There were more casualties, but they won that war also.
What
And
countries were they?
it was the big three, Syria, Lebanon, and Egypt. And and uh, and the Rebbe explained that Hashem did even bigger miracles for the Jewish people. So the Rebbe's calling these Jewish children and telling everybody there's tremendous danger. That's also prophecy. And the Rebbe said afterwards that the miracles of 1973 were even bigger than the miracles of 1967. And because it was a total surprise, there was the Egyptians and the Syrians easily broke through the Israeli lines, and they went as and there was nothing stopping them. There would have been nothing stopping them from plowing through Tel Aviv, plowing through plowing all the way up to Haifa, plowing all the way through everything, through Tiberias, everywhere, and massacring millions of Jews. There was nothing stopping them. You know what happened? Anybody know? Anybody know? For some mysterious reason, the Syrian armies and the Egyptian armies stopped in their tracks and sat there and did nothing for days until they did nothing until and in that time the Israelis were able to launch a huge counterattack and wipe them out. And afterwards it was like it was almost like angels were standing in front of their tanks and not letting them roll further into Israel.
I was just thinking of the story of Bilam.
Just a second. And the Rebbe said, do you know why those tanks stopped? It's because the little children stopped them. The little children's prayers from this summer stopped those tanks. That's why they couldn't roll further. So anyway, so when the Rebbe tells us that when the Rebbe tells us, in Shoftim, the Rebbe told us that Mashiach is coming. He's coming now, and the Rebbe told us that I'm not saying that this is not being said. The Rebbe didn't use the word I. The Rebbe said this is not being said in the role of a wise person, in the role of a Torah teacher. This is being said in the line of prophecy. And as we know, if it's been said in the line of prophecy and it's a true and it's a good prophecy, it must happen. And just a small segue, if a prophet says something bad will happen, if the Jewish people do teshuvah, they make amends, and they can stop the bad prophecy. But a good prophecy must happen. So if the Rebbe says that that Mashiach is coming, we are obligated to believe him. And the Rebbe said in this parsha that not only are we, the Rebbe said,
5, 7,
just a second, I'm going to unhook
4,
this.
1, 4, 1, 4.
Okay, so the Rebbe said that the Rebbe said also in this sikha, what if you're not comfortable with the news that Mashiach is coming? You're uncomfortable telling people. The Rebbe said it's not Hashem's problem; it's your problem. You have to still do it because the prophet said so. And what if you say, oh, my family's not going to be receptive to this? And the Rebbe said, it doesn't matter. You have to get yourself, you have to do what the prophet said. And the Rebbe said, and if this was totally something out of left field that people had never heard of before, then you might be right. But it's not. It is already worked into the fabric of the world, that people know about this concept. And so it is your job, the prophet told you, go inform everyone. So anyway, that's make sure
to know
to
about which concept.
So last week, I want to say that just at the Shabbos table, I was so excited about a story that I had to tell, and Yeskel Shimon was excited about a story that he had to tell, and I started to tell it, and Yeskel Shimon said, "That's the exact same story I want to tell." It's never happened in the history of our marriage that we came that we got, we found the same story to get excited over. And that's the story it's going to tell next week. So make sure not to miss it.